This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story, once a week. I'm Anais.
I'm Andy.
And I'm Gerald.
And yeah, we're finally discussing Javi. This has been hard to schedule. Summers are crazy. People do things. They go on vacation or writing retreats like Gerald.
Yay.
Yay. Do you want to talk about your writing retreat real quick?
Yeah, really quick. It's a sort of cross between a writing retreat and a summer school. It's a charity, so there's sort of no profit motive. Some of the delegates run the courses, and they get some people in as well. So I ran a couple of workshops this year on NaNoWriMo and self-publishing, and it's sort of good to give back. So it's only my third time, but really enjoyed it. Really, but it gets a bit intense because there are around about 280 writers there for the whole week, and you do workshops on writing. The tea breaks, people are talking about writing. Dinner, people are talking about writing. And after about 3 or 4 days, you just have to get away. And fortunately, where we go, there's some nice walks around around a pond, around a lake and stuff. So it's pretty good. But yeah, it's quite intense. Quite intense.
I enjoyed your tweets.
Good.
Lessons on how to murder people and get away with it. Yeah.
Yeah. How to slit someone's throat. This is important information.
It really is. Yeah. Did you see any of those tweets, Andy?
Yeah.
I did not.
They're very good. And then it's funny because in the tweet is something gruesome, like, how to get away with murder. And there's like a picture of like just a very vanilla conference room, someone standing in the front with like a PowerPoint. So banal murder.
But there was that good one when she had a victim sitting on a chair, and she had a knife across their throat, reaching over and saying, if I do it this way, or if I do it this way. Things to remember.
Well, speaking of, it sounds mean to be like, speaking of banal things, this week's story. No, I like the story, so that's a horrible way to start. But we'll discuss why that also feels like an appropriate way to introduce it. So this week we're discussing Javi by Hang Ong. I hope Hong. I think so. So the story is about a 14-year-old boy who is a Mexican migrant, undocumented, who starts working for an 82-year-old painter who has achieved fame late in life. And she's very, she's a bit of a hermit, not very social, but they hit it off in their quiet, self-reliant way. And he helps her around the house, and she starts painting. Well, she's always painting, but then a journalist type person, somebody who's like archiving her story for a gallery, comes by. They start talking about the work. Afterwards, the painter is no longer inspired to paint, blames it on this person who came and spoke to her. The painter, along with Javi, burns 8 of her own paintings, never releases them, and then refuses to do follow-up interviews with the woman who had come to interview her. And then as a side plot to all of this, there's a story of Javi, his mother, and her friends, who are all undocumented immigrants who, as the administration's policies become harsher, are living in fear and want to go to a sanctuary in Los Angeles where there's a church that's trying to help people escape, deportation. So yeah. And then Javi goes and drops off these women, and then returns to the painter, realizing he'll probably never see his mother again. And that's the story.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything in my summary?
Yeah. No, it's pretty good.
All right. Okay. Winging it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Andy, did you like the story?
No, of course I didn't like the story.
Why?
What's this story about? What's this story about? Is it about Javi's relationship with the painter? Is it about Javi's relationship with his mom? Is it about immigration policies? Is it about, I don't know what it's about. And it's trying to do too many things. Like, pick a thing, be one thing.
So you don't think it could be multiple things well?
I think someone could write a story that does multiple things well.
Wow.
Apparently not Anong.
Damn. Okay. Gerald.
Wow.
Did you like it?
I keep sort of swinging between I really like it and I really dislike it. I think to summarize it, I was disappointed with the ending, and I felt that the bit where his mother and her friends came into it sort of just changed it. It's almost like it was bolted on. And I liked the main story. I was really enjoying the main story, and I felt if he'd have sort of finished that story off, then it would have been better rather than having her mother and her friends come in, and then they've got to go to California and it just changed it, and it changed the themes then, and it became too much about undocumented migration and hiding from ICE and all this sort of stuff. So but I enjoyed the reading of it generally.
Yeah. So I think I'm probably the warmest of the three of us, but I didn't start there. And the story made me think about how I feel like, so this story, when we talk about literary fiction on the show, we're always blurring that line. We're saying, hey, a fantasy piece could be literary. It really, literally just literary starts to mean, does it touch something in you? Does it talk about human experience? Is it making some greater point beyond wizards shooting things at each other? And if you're making that point with wizards, that's fine. That you're doing it with fantasy, but it's still literary, right? Like that's kind of the definition that's sort of been evolving on the show. But then there's the kind of literary fiction that I think is what most people think of as literary fiction that they sometimes bristle at, which I think is this kind of story where I feel like literary fiction, when it's like this, is almost like a game for intellectuals who focus on literary fiction to play. Like you're supposed to be digging in and finding certain things and looking, right? Like never does he say that this is based loosely on Agnes Martin. You, the intellectual, should know this from the game, right? Like there's a certain back and forth. You put in some tiny little like Easter egg and you got to figure out what that is. Oh, the clue. Okay, the stripes. Oh, this makes sense. New Mexico. Oh, right? Like without ever laying anything out. And I think that game might be something that is a lot of fun for people who read a lot of literary fiction. Also gratifying when you figure it out. You're like, oh, yes, I'm so smart. But doesn't always lend itself to something that is an enjoyable read for people who just want to be entertained, which there's nothing wrong with either. Some literary fiction can do both. Some has the game and that entertainment factor, and some like don't pay enough attention to the fact that you still got to take a reader on a fun journey or some kind of journey. And I feel like maybe that's what's happening here. I feel like Andy's resisting what I'm saying based on his expression.
No, just I mentioned this story to someone, and she pointed out an interview she read with Han Ung.
About the story? Because I read that same interview.
About this story, where she specifically mentions how he's not someone who outlines, and the bit with Javi's mom just came to him at the end. It was super absolutely bolted on at the end.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why?
I mean, I 100% agree with what Gerald said, that whole thing, like once the mom and her friends move in, that whole thing seemed tacked on and sudden and out of nowhere. And it gave it like a second ending kind of feeling. Like it didn't really need this. Even if you name the story Javi, but it's mostly about the painter, it's also kind of about Javi in a way. The painter at some point says that Javi is her. Like that's such a weird thing to say, that she says totally deadpan. Well, she says everything deadpan. So yeah, it did feel tacked on. I read that interview as well, and I was like, yeah. We can all tell.
Yeah, that's obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, but even with the fact that it's tacked on,
it's kind of a shame, really.
Would you have liked it more without that tacked on part?
I mean, I would have, but I also feel like that's indicative of the whole thing. I think you're looking for a lot of layers that aren't there. He's just writing some nonsense.
No. Once I embraced the game, I had fun with the game.
Yeah, but are you just finding patterns?
I have notes. Probably, but also finding patterns is part of the game. Like that's the game. That's the intellectual literary game.
You're super great at finding patterns, and in these discussions, you convince me of a lot of things all the time.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's really cool. But how much of that is actually from the author? Like, did he just write something vague enough and bullshit enough that you can find really cool patterns?
Possibly. And let me tell you, I have fun with that kind of analysis as well. But also there's something that after I read the interview confirmed some of the things that I had thought about as well. So we'll get into that. Why don't we just start with what I think is the central part of the original story, which is the relationship between Javi and this painter before everything else got tacked down, right? So, Gerald, what did you think of that relationship? Yeah, just nice and vague.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was an interesting relationship. It was the sort of relationship where you think that it's not possible for them to have a relationship because they are so different backgrounds, different ages, different sort of mentalities. But actually, I think the writer does a really good job of making them compatible because he sets the painter's sort of red lines and the understanding under which Javi joins her. That's set out right at the start. So Javi says, "Yeah, I'm whatever you want, I'll do that, and I can help you." So he writes that she finds that comfortable then because Javi is working within the boundaries that she set. So I liked that, and I don't know if he could have made more of because Javi then becomes very passive. He just does whatever she wants, and I just wonder whether there could have been a bit of tension or a bit of conflict when he wanted to do something that she didn't want him to do.
And do you have anything to argue or add to that? You were sort of nodding, but then shaking your head.
Well, yeah, no, it's another eccentric genius artist meets a kid who's, poor kid hangs out with eccentric genius artist, and there's a million of those stories. What's the Mel Gibson movie? The Man Without a Face?
Bye.
It's dumb.
I have canceled that reading of this. Canceled. I mean, I agree that pairing isn't new, but one of the things that I liked about this so much is normally when that happens, it's the vivaciousness and the energy of the child being a child that inspires the eccentric painter to come out of their shell. That is not what happened here at all. And I thought it was very striking that Javier, as a 14-year-old boy, from the very beginning, instinctually knows what he needs to do to get a job. Like, he's a 14-year-old boy, and he's reading out this long resume. He drives stick. What 14-year-old drives stick, okay? So it very quickly paints a picture, without beating you over the head, of the fact that this kid has been forced to mature very quickly. And when he's talking to her and trying to get a job, normally when you're trying to pitch, I'm going to be your home help aid person to an 82-year-old person. You say, hey, you're getting old. You shouldn't do everything yourself. You should have some help. He doesn't do that. He calls her strong. He's like, oh, really? You're 82. You seem strong. Still, I can help. Like, he knows instinctually what he needs to say here. He's like very mature. And that deference, that passiveness is necessary. She will not put up with anyone who isn't just deferential and does exactly what she says. Like, and he knows that. And I thought that was different and cool. That's not your typical eccentric older artist takes on a kid thing, because normally the whole point is that the kid is a kid and opens the eccentric artist's heart. Where here, it's more like, actually, Javi is mature beyond his years. He knows exactly what he needs to do. He's extremely deferential. He only speaks when she wants him to speak. And it suits him. He likes this. He doesn't want to go to LA. He wants to come back. Javi is going to be a weirdo when he's older too. Like they're very similar. And they understand.
But that's also
quietly. Mm-hmm.
That's also the central conflict of such a story, which is also the interesting part. It's like, oh, here's these two people who mesh perfectly together, and then nothing happens.
Yeah. Okay, I will say that tacked on ending with LA was necessary, even if it felt tacked on and weird and sudden, because if it didn't, the arc of the story goes, and then an interviewer shows up upsets the delicate eccentric painter. So the delicate eccentric painter burns her own art and deletes emails from the interviewer moving forward. That is not a very compelling arc. So I can see why the author felt like he had to add on the plight of the undocumented migrants going to LA, because without it, it's like, cool, eccentric artist is eccentric. Yeah. I don't know if that's a harsh reading. I still like
because he wrote a boring story.
No, it's one of those literary things where it's like, it's really about the character. Javi, on my first read through, I felt like he wasn't doing enough. And on my second read through, all those things that I pointed out jumped out at me more. Like, how does he know to tell an 82-year-old woman you're strong? Like, wait, he drives stick at 14. Like, why did I miss this the first time around? Like, it's insane. Like, just, and the fact that she says to the interviewer, Javi is me, is such a weird thing. Like, I feel like the author was just obsessed with Agnes Martin, and then I read the interview and it's like, yeah, okay, he was obsessed with Agnes Martin. There it is. And it shows. And then when you're an author and you want to write that, but you don't know what the plot is yet, what do? What happens? And then I think this is what happens. So he has to tack on a trip to LA. Anyway, like, that's my take.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know what I like about
not very
authors?
interesting.
Yeah, when they write something that has a plot.
I know, Andy. Okay, so
Yeah.
we keep saying that.
I think that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That that there isn't that much of a story, and it's, as I say, I think Javi was too passive, too accommodating. There was no. I mean, yes, he's desperate for a job, and yes, he's very, very welcome to have the accommodation and the food and all that stuff. But actually, I think he's just so passive, and there's not much story. And then you have to go digging deep for sort of literary connections, and to me, I think you have to have a story that you can get on the first read through, and then on the second read through, you then start discovering the different layers and different parts that you missed on the first time.
That's that game, I think.
Yeah.
But the important part Gerald mentioned was,
right,
you have to enjoy it on the first read through also.
Yes, exactly. That's why I'm saying, I think that's why literary fiction gets a bad rap. Yeah. Too much literary fiction, or the people who publish literary fiction tolerate stories that on the first read through, you're like, huh? Like, that's probably why it gets such a bad rap. So we keep saying that the painter...
it deserves it.
Oh my God. So we keep saying the painter is loosely based on Agnes Martin. So Gerald, who was Agnes Martin?
I've just written interesting person, rubbish painter. And sorry for fans of her. I sometimes have a hard time with modern art. I quite like abstract art when it's abstract. I think parallel lines and orthogonal lines with a bit of pastel paint. I don't get it. There are so many of her paintings that are all very much similar, and I just don't see how she can be expressing what she wants to express by painting the same thing every time. So I'm a modern art Luddite, so that's probably it.
I mean, I feel like she's exploring something about lines. I don't know what that something is. Like, I'm not saying that I'm super compelled by the art, but I can definitely see that she's working through something, and there's like a point that's being made here, even if it's going over my head. Like, I'd have to learn more about the art itself to get it, really. Yeah. Andy, why do you think the author chose her as a subject?
Well, so that's the key question. The author was moved by this painter, but Javi obviously doesn't get her paintings any more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, why is that? If you were going to say something about her as a painter, or her paintings, or what about her art inspired him, why is your viewpoint character like, there's a bunch of lines, and then we burned them?
Isn't the fact that Javi doesn't have to understand her art yet still respects her work as an artist really just what a kid? Like, he's 14. Like, just the fact that he's like, when she stops painting and like, what about your work? He doesn't understand it. He doesn't see the value of it, but he knows it's something that she needs. He knows it's something that she's been doing forever, and he continues to encourage her even without understanding it. Like, that is an incredible level of support that I thought was great. I really like their relationship once I started playing that literary game. Because he should be like, oh my God, going to the multiplex is so much more fun than sitting in a studio reading her from the Bible. Like, she paints for 8 hours straight. Right? But he doesn't. He'll go to the multiplex, but also he's like, so how about just sitting in your studio for 8 hours as I read from the Bible to you? As I read probably one of the more depressing parts about just death and suffering. You know? Yeah. Yeah. But in the interview, Oh, go ahead, Gerald.
Yeah, I mean, she as the real person, she's sort of super interesting and fascinating. And was she gay? People sort of seem to think that she might have been gay, but she never came out and lived on her own all her life and moved around a little bit and built the same sort of house wherever she went to. I think there's a lot in her character that we sort of find out, but not much. I think maybe he could have explored the paint if it is like a homage to this Agnes painter woman. Then I think he could have probably done a lot more about her character, or extrapolate from her character into his fictional painter's character.
But in the interview that I read in the New Yorker with the author, he says that the first time he was introduced to her, it was through her prose, not through her paintings. Even though she was primarily a painter, she also did a little bit of writing. And he says one of the lines that she wrote that stuck with him was, "We are born as verbs and not as nouns." And one of the things that I loved about the story is after I read that interview and then I went back to reading the story, he has this line about how she has all these boxes of like painting supplies and old maps from when she went through an old map phase, and all these index cards where she would write, just like scribble thoughts that came into her mind. And then he writes in the story, they read like obscure fortune cookie wisdom. And I'm like, he's referring to that thing that he said in the interview. That's the game, right? And what I love about it is I feel like, as an amateur aspiring writer myself, if there's some line that I'm like, oh, that's a good line, I'm trying to work it in no matter what. And he's not doing that. Like, he could have made this her dialogue. He could have like done that homage directly. But he doesn't do that. He just gives you a really nice turn of phrase. They read like obscure fortune cookie wisdom, and that's it. And no more. And you know how like a lot of writers, you can sometimes read the line that like inspired the story. Like, they're like, I gotta work this line into something. Like, like you ever had that in like amateur writing where you're like, that's the line that they were like, oh.
Yes.
And it's usually a piece of dialogue, like some sassy thing someone said. I love that. Like, that felt very mature, the way that he put that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then what did that do for the story? Like,
no, it's part of the game.
Oh yeah, very clever.
I mean, there was a lot of really clever stuff in there. You're extremely like dismissive. If you let go of the idea that there has to be a plot, if you let go of that, there's a lot of like really like the whole bit about fame, what she says to the interviewer about fame, I thought was very compelling. I like the line where fame confers upon a subject the gift of an afterlife. It's a great line.
I don't know. I've liked stories we've read that didn't have plots before.
True.
It's not required, but, sure is nice. Helps hang everything else together.
Yeah. So why do you think you resisted so much here? What really bothered you about it? If it wasn't the lack of...
The ending irritated me to no end. Mm-hmm. And then made it very hard to go back on a second read through because I was like, oh, and then this is gonna not matter, and then his mom just goes to LA, and it was always in my mind. It's like, and also it fades off into nothingness.
Yeah, I guess. I like the little pearls of wisdom that he works in. That was enough for me. I will say the pacing the first time around was grueling.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, and then they sat in the studio, and then they had lunch, and then they cooked some vegetables, and then she had a glass of water. There's literally she sat there and had a glass of water line. That was grueling the first time. I had a lot more patience for it the second time.
You know what though? The first time as I was going, you're not wrong, but as I was going through it, I was like, okay, this is gonna be some kind of thing. It's gonna make a point about their relationship or something, and then it didn't. And so with the knowledge of how it ended, it became much more grueling the second time around. It was like, oh, now I'll read about how he has a glass of water. That sure says a lot about his relationship with his mom and undocumented immigrants. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't. It's pointless.
Wow.
It's interesting because I know you're coming on to the pace of the story, or you've already come on to the pace of the story, and I loved the pacing of the story. I thought the writer did a good job of getting enough stuff into the.
Thanks.
Yeah, very good. Just this is going to mess up the audio.
I want to go on record and say that Anais is the one who has the ability to cherry pick these comments. So everyone's saying, "Yeah, you're right,
True.
Andy. These stories are dumb." Being silenced.
Yeah.
Someone thinks Andy is right. Please comment saying that you're Team Andy on this one, and I will put it up. But I do get to cherry pick the comments.
Yeah. So I loved the pacing. I loved what he did with it. Because it was a steady story and interesting and I loved the characters. So yeah, I liked it. That bit of it anyway.
It never felt slow for you? You do like the kind of
No.
Yeah, that's true. You've been okay with slow. Yeah.
If it's interesting and if I'm engaged with the characters, which I was, then yeah, it could be slow as you like. And the technical aspects of his writing were good. You know, the sentence construction was good. There was no author intrusion. So I just went along with it. It's quite a long old story, 8,000 odd words, but no, it didn't bother me at all.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I had more patience for it the second time around because I was like, okay, this is going to be a literary game. I'm game. And then all of a sudden, the slow pace felt like it was communicating to you the slow pace of their lifestyle. They're living out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by scrubland that they don't even use. The neighbors' horses come through, and their days are really kind of slow and empty. Like they're not frenetic in any way. They don't have 1,000 things to do. In fact, he disappears, watches an entire movie, comes back, and she has no questions about it because it doesn't matter, right? So I think it communicated that very well. Like, and just also the nature of their relationship. She's just sitting there in silence at the kitchen table having a glass of water, and he's very chill with this life. Again, as a 14-year-old, every time you remember that, it's incredible because I always picture him as an older teen and he's not. So then it makes sense. And if the theme is sort of just exploring this kind of quiet, slow relationship that can kind of form, right? Like, if it's really just exploring that, then it's very appropriate. And then you tack on the immigrant thing. And the immigrant section was fast, actually. The immigrant section was like boom, 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 boom. Like, okay. Like the pace completely changed. Which is probably, again, why it felt so jarring.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Were there any other themes we haven't discussed yet?
I mean, it's a theme of loneliness, maybe, or something like that, because she was a very solitary, being solitary, because she was a very solitary person. So there was always the idea that the painter as a character didn't really need Javi around. She didn't, she was quite, and she was quite sort of comfortable in her lifestyle, and she'd made arrangements to go into this sort of old folks home thing that was happening that she put off when he joined her. So I think she was sort of quite content with her life. So maybe he's showing that just because you're on your own, you're not necessarily lonely, which I think he would presume from the Agnes character.
Yeah. And also, there was a bit of a miraculous timing. She was about to sort of give in to the idea that she should go to retirement home now. And then Javi arrives at just the right moment, the week before she's supposed to move. And that changes her plans. I wonder how much of that timing made her feel like this is actually special. So she invested more in the narrative of Javi, being, so central to the way that she has to live her life now. And the one thing the immigration policy stuff did before that abrupt ending when the mother moves in is it showed you a different side of Agnes. Because if the whole story, okay, I keep calling her Agnes. Her name's not Agnes. She's just the painter. Shows you a different side of the painter. Because if the painter only lets this kid talk when she says it's okay, forces him to read from the Bible for like hours on end while she's painting, and never does anything for him, she comes off as too autocratic and cold. And the fact that she's here getting him a fake ID, writing a note so that the cops don't harass him, giving cover to his family, the fact that she is also generous and cares in that way rounds her out as well. So like some of the immigration stuff I think was necessary to shaping her, but then the end again just felt excessive. Yeah. Even though personally right now anything with immigration stuff I'm all ears. Because the timing is right. I just don't know that the story did it in the way that that I would have found more compelling.
Who would have written a story that
because the rest, the rest of the story was so subtly constructed. Yeah, the immigration stuff was quite blunt and quite obvious, and there was no sort of finessing of it. It was just they're doing this because they've got to keep moving, and in case they're discovered. And I just think that he could have done something better with it rather than just have Javi drive halfway across the country to take them to some place.
Okay, we're like 32 minutes in, so let's move to Gerald. You said that you did like the author's writing style, though.
I did like the writing style.
You did, yes, you did, yeah. So what did you like the most about it? Like, what do you feel that this author in particular has mastered?
I think, I mean, mastered. I don't know. I think he's showing that he can tell a narrative. It's not a very interesting narrative, but he can tell a narrative, and I think what he does with the characters is good. He makes the characters individual. So even though there's the dialogue has no quotation marks, has very few dialogue tags, but you always know who's speaking because of the way they speak. So I think he does a good job with that. And I think he does a good job of painting the picture of where they are. The description is not overdone. It's just enough so you get a pretty good idea of their situation and the location. So yeah, I in that way, as I said earlier, the sort of sentence construction and the low level stuff kept me interested in reading.
Yeah, I really liked his dialogue. That was great. It felt really real to me, and that was the moment where you felt like there was something happening between them. Like that's when he communicated that best. And also he had a lot of fun turns of phrase. One of my favorites was when Javi's getting annoyed at his mother once she's moved in, and it says how it describes him as huffily getting up and making a performance of his dishwashing at the sink. We all know what that is. We've all lived with someone who's being grumpy but doesn't want to say anything and is like doing things dramatically, opening the closet door dramatically, taking out the trash dramatically. I loved it. Yeah. Anything you appreciated, Andy, or are you coming in full of hate?
No, like the same thing. There was I don't want to say a lot. There were several clever little turns of phrases, although now I'm trying to skim through it, and much too dense a story for me to pick out anything that I especially like.
Control F. Find that word.
Yeah, I was trying to do that and come up with what I wanted it to. Yeah, no, there was clever little bits and clever little sentences, and it kept me moving through it the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like if the story hadn't tacked on that immigrant ending, the story would have been a little bit about fame. Because the point where the painter starts to get upset is the only time you see any dialogue on what she's saying to the interviewer is when she's fighting that idea that she's just like, okay, so only because I'm famous now am I worthy of being cataloged, studied, and having an afterlife, which is also something an 82-year-old would be especially annoyed about, being so close to that afterlife. I really liked that, but the plot wasn't enough to make that enough of a story. So, yeah. Okay. Anything to add, or are we ready to rate?
Oh, crikey, right. Nope.
Nope. Okay. Andy, do you want to go first?
Oh,
you have something to add?
Sure. Well, I noticed none of the legions of people who are agreeing with me have had their comments featured.
No one. Honestly, that was the only comment. We have shy.
The silent majority.
The silent majority. Yeah, the silent majority that agrees with Andy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It was an okay story on the first read with some clever little bits, and then it turns out, surprise, it was made out of garbage. So 2 out of 6.
Damn. Okay. Gerald?
Yeah, sorry, it's 3.5 from me. Disappointed in the ending. There's some things to like about it, but I think it's just a disappointment that it could have been so much better, I think.
Okay, that's closer to me. I'm coming in at a 4 because that double ending.
Wow.
Yeah.
You really played that up a lot to give it a 4.
Because you guys are so negative. I feel like there's a lot of good stuff here to talk about, so I'm going to talk about it. But this definitely isn't a story that, like, if I ever do again, my top 10 of, like I was trying to do, like, the top 10 of the first 30 episodes, this wouldn't make one of those lists, right? So, yeah. I thought about a 4.5, but I'm just like,
nope.
All right. I'm too easy of a grader. I'm getting tougher. So.
Yeah.
I'll keep working on that bottom so that you can. That way, a 3 doesn't feel as harsh from you.
Okay. So there's no game this week because next week we are welcoming a guest. Author Beth Mayer will be joining us to discuss Girls at Play by Celeste Ng. And yeah, so go read that. There's a link in the show notes. The magic of indie editing on a podcast is we already did that discussion, and oh my god, like I can preview it, which is weird, and that is a great discussion, and Andy basically wants to die the entire episode, so great.
And I wasn't there.
Yeah, actually, now that we're doing this, Gerald, did you end up reading that story at all?
I can't remember. I've had
you'd remember if you'd read it.
2 weeks away.
You'd remember. So you did not.
2 weeks away from the podcast, and I've just lost. I'm out of sync with everything. So
that's one of the stories that
didn't then.
gets stuck in your brain forever, and you are traumatized for the rest of your life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So maybe give it a miss.
Yeah. No, I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of what I said.
So,
All right. It's your
All right.
funeral.
All right. So go read Girls That Play.
All right.
But before you go, refute my theory that some literary stories are a game for intellectuals in our Facebook group, the Literary Roadhouse Readers, or on Twitter @LitRoadhouse, or our website, literaryroadhouse.com. By the way, the topic of immigration is one we revisit more deeply in our book club. We're currently reading Lost Children Archives by Valeria Lucelli, which dwells on the same topic. Join us on the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, where we discuss a novel each month. And lastly, this story has inspired Gerald in particular to take up abstract art comprised almost entirely of lines in the hopes of attaining late life fame. This is 100% true. So support Gerald's career as a painter and our podcast expenses at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with a 14-year-old who drives stick in your life. Until next time, read a good story.